Probably. Okay. Can you hear me, Sophie?
I can. Hi,
Excellent.
Lyónn.
Hey, Sophie. So just to give you a feeling of the room, we're in like a smallish venue, but very, very cozy. And it feels a little bit like a salon. And the room is full of friendly faces. And we are also joined online by people all over the world. Definitely some of my friends and acquaintances are very excited for the conversation. Is it possible for me to not see myself? So yeah, much better.
I'm going to do the same.
I think it's possible to see. Oh, wait. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's try that.
Okay. Okay. So, Sophie, I'm going to do a little bit of a preamble to give kind of context for where this conversation arrives from. And I'm going to introduce you as well. But just to let everyone in the room know, I'm not going to be talking the whole time. This isn't just about me. So it's going to be around 5 minutes, and then me and Sophie will get into a conversation. So thanks everyone, first of all, for being here. Really, really happy to be part of the festival. I've been a long-term fan of Outburst and really impressed by the longevity and also what it does in Belfast. So this conversation comes within the frame of a new research project I'm doing. I'm a visual artist with a background in community theatre and political organising. And the project has an overarching umbrella title of deproduction. And it's thinking about different forms of reproduction in terms of reproduction of ourselves, of babies, of labor, of knowledge, of bodies, sex. So it's like quite a broad, like I tend to do a really huge amount of research and then kind of pull it in a bit for different contexts. So within that pool of research, Sophie's work has been really, really important. And alongside Sophie's writing and other people's writings, I've been writing as well. So as things come up, I try to locate an example of something in my own life that speaks to that particular theory or that particular set of ideas. And I've been kind of banging out fragments of memories, reflections, exchanges that I feel offer a kind of crossing and say something from my own experience to this kind of broader, space of theory and ideas. And I'm going to start with reading one of those fragments just to locate us. And it was the first one I wrote. So I will start with this. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. On July 9th, 1982, Ridley Scott's Alien was premiered on British television, and by post-colonial proxy was available for viewing in Ireland. I was 7 years old, living in my grandmother's council house with my mother, cousins, aunts, and their transient friends and boyfriends. My father, similarly the fathers of my cousins, had disappeared without a trace 2 years prior leaving a trail of unpaid debt and no legal possibility for divorce. We were jettisoned from our rented suburban home to the chaos of extended, illegitimate, working-class family temporality. My mother, her sisters, and friends assembled in the sitting room for this widely publicized TV event, filling the room with thick cigarettes and hashish smoke. Having already seen Alien in the cinema, my mother knew the plot. Towards the end of the movie, when Ripley thinks she has escaped the tenacious, racialized, feminized, and aggressively reproductive alien, exiting the exploding ship in a shuttle, my mother woke me from our shared bed to watch the final scene. Blurry with sleep and stinging smoke, I was transfixed by Ripley, Sigourney Weaver, in a part written for a man and left unchanged, a sci-fi drag role, as she and the alien engage in a frightening final battle. When I spoke with my mother about this event, she told me that she believed I needed to see these kinds of images, to witness a non-feminized woman fighting alone. Apart from the reference to our single mother, only child struggles, I guess she already knew then that I was queer, and Ripley was as good as it got in terms of representation in 1982. I wonder, in this working class sitting room, who were the aliens and who were the victims? Who would escape and from what? So if anyone feels like offering me a book deal and giving me a deadline, this might actually get published. It's on the brink. Okay, so we're joined this evening by people who are in Berlin, Bogota, London, California, Sydney, Dublin, and other places. So you're all very welcome. So just a little overview of what deep production is within the work I'm doing. So I'm focusing on questions of time and transtemporality, thinking about how the collapse of ecosystems brought about by colonial extractive logics are shaping our understandings of reproduction, aging, and work. And in my work more generally, I'm interested in exploring queer and feminist practices that propose and make systems, structures, and political imaginaries that are inviting of promiscuity, care, sustainability, difference, and joy. So Sophie's work has been central to this thought process and also to a more general repatterning of relationships. So I'm not blaming you for anything, Sophie. The work has definitely touched many nerves. And how I generally kind of think about questions of how to continue to live well together. Sophie's work has been really, really important. This exchange is something that I've been future manifesting since I first read Full Surrogacy Now. I'm full of gratitude to Sophie for the sharing of her radical, funny, and brave spaces of thought with us through her writing, speaking, and teaching, which happen across a proliferation of differing contexts, often away from the academy. Sophie describes herself as a recovering academic and has said that the art world can be where insurgencies go to die, which I have to laugh at every time. Based in Philadelphia and known for her anti-state communism, transfeminism, literary criticism, and cultural analysis, especially her critical utopian theorization of full surrogacy and her advocacy for family abolition. In 2019, Sophie was commissioned to write an op-ed in the New York Times to explain how British feminism became anti-trans, where she proposed that the reason for the United Kingdom's trans-exclusionary radical feminism is its history of imperialism. And that in and of itself could be a whole conversation, but it's not the rabbit hole we're going down necessarily today. Her publications include Full Surrogacy Now, Feminism Against Family, published by Verso Books, hailed by Donna Haraway, as the seriously radical cry for full gestational justice that I long for, which is quite an accolade. Woo! And then, oh no, before that, Full Surrogacy Now. Oh yeah, that one. And then Abolish the Family in 2022, a manifesto for care and liberation, by Verso Books also, which has been translated into loads of languages. So it's really traveling. And the book that's on the horizon, that's about to be published, right? It's almost here. Enemy Feminisms, TERFs, Police Women, and Girl Bosses Against Liberation, Chicago Haymarket Books. And it's described as being at once a trans feminist battle cry against cisness, woo, a decolonial takedown of nationalist womanhoods, woohoo, and a sex radical retort to femphobia in all its guises. Lewis has been described as operating a strikingly hopeful Marxist feminism, or feminist Marxism, I should say, actually, it's important. She advocates for children's liberation, communization, family abolition, Palestinian liberation, transgender rights, and climate justice. As a member of the faculty of the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research, Sophie teaches courses on feminist, trans, and queer politics and philosophy. And it was as a student of one of these courses, where I attended online, which was titled Ecofeminism, Xenofeminisms, and Zecofeminisms, that I first met Sophie and engaged in a discursive exchange along with a widespread group. So almost done. Thanks to Household Belfast for your openness and excitement about making things happen together. And to Outburst for 18 years of celebrating and nurturing queer talent. Thanks to both Household and Outburst for hosting us this evening, and to the Black Box Green Room. And thanks so much to Sophie for taking the leap to engage and trust that your ideas aren't coming here to die, but to take flight.
I feel every confidence with you about that, Lyónn. Thanks for having me. Thank you, Outburst. It's really good to be here.
I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to quote something back to you, which comes from an essay that you wrote, which is amazing and which everyone can access online. It's called Mothering Against Motherhood, Doula Work, Xeno-Hospitality, and the Idea of the Mom Raid. And there's a lot of crossover with that essay and Abolish the Family. I feel like they speak well with each other. And the quote is, and I'm kind of bringing this, I'm starting with this to locate us within the idea of abolitionism, because it's for some people quite new, and it can sound like a negation before you start kind of understanding the history of it, especially in terms of queer liberation and other liberatory struggles. So, after all, my deepest spiritual and political commitments are to the revolutionary slogan, abolish the family. I consider the positive suppression of the nuclear normative family to have always been the proper object of queer liberation and feminist gender liberation struggles. So Sophie, I'm just wondering, as a starting point of thinking with you, I was really interested to think with this in terms of that you claim it as your deepest spiritual and political commitment. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to both of those things within that statement.
Gosh, yeah, I've forgotten that I put the word spiritual in there. No, it's good. Thank you. Your questions are always really sharp. Well, let me just say hello, because this disembodied frame is so strange, right? I just wanted to say that I'm speaking to you from some land, after all, right? The land of the Lenni Lenape, with a city known as Philadelphia. But, I actually grew up in France, half German, and I sound tragically like a posh Brit. But I'm actually one of the, what, 345 million people in the US who will shortly be ruled over by Elon Musk and Donald Trump more directly. And I wondered if, before I answer your question about this commitment, spiritual and political, I could just say something first about the purposive destruction of Palestinian family and Palestinian kin making and Palestinian life making, because my taxes are directly paying for it. And I know there's a great tradition of Palestine solidarity in Ireland, which is hardly surprising given the experiences with the blunt end of British colonialism and that you know, the Irish and Palestinian people share historically. So I'm not nervous so much in this forum to comment, as I do even when I am nervous about it, that you know, as a person associated with the politics of communizing care and of reproductive freedom and justice, and therefore also of the liberation of children, which I'm preparing a book about, it does not make sense to me, I guess you could say spiritually, to say anything publicly without acknowledging that there is this genocide overwhelmingly of children raging, right, for over a year, and that the relatively thick kinship ties of a predominantly peasant society have been annihilated to such an extent that a new ethnographic or relationship category has had to be invented. WCNSF, right? Wounded child, no surviving family, which is an almost unfathomable achievement on the part of the genocide in a society where, as Palestinian feminists have informed me, the slogan, "All children belong to all of us," has been popular for decades, right? So amidst all of these live streamed images of genocide, we've been seeing a kind of, as always in disasters, a kind of disaster communism, this phrase, and of course a tragically necessitated deprivatization of care, or disaster polymaternalism, you know, made necessary by the slaughter of kin. And in a moment of what I guess I've sometimes called real families against the family, right? The logic of biological relationship sanctity and familial authority was briefly turned against the logic of family values, revenge, nationalism, and ethnic cleansing, when the relatives of Israeli hostages demanded that the Israeli state exchange, quote unquote, everyone for everyone, meaning that the hundreds, actually thousands of pre-existing Palestinian hostages or prisoners be released and exchanged for those kidnapped on October 7th. So this, as defenders of the Palestinian resistance here in the US have pointed out, was a cry of everyone for everyone, instead of us for us and them for them. Therefore, an abolitionist logic, a family abolitionist logic too, flung up momentarily in the very crucible of this process that we ought to recognize all too well as United States denizens, you know, the elimination of the native. So if you ask me, if we as a species, it's not just, you know, I realize it's in a sense a gesture I'm making, but it's also profoundly central to the theorizing, I think. I do and have been trying to do. If we want to, as a species, to make it out of this century alive in any sense worthy of the name, we're going to have to actualize care infrastructures that commit everyone to everyone and endow all children, and James Baldwin talked about this too famously, with the many, many mothers that they all deserve. And so that does bring me to your question about that essay. Thank you for indulging that.
Well, thank you for that.
Oh, I'm glad it
Yeah.
was.
No, it's really makes sense.
Yeah. The Mom Raids piece it's on some level a big shift in register because it is memoir to some extent. Um, it it's called Mom Raids Against the World or Mothering Against Motherhood. In fact, it has, I think, two different titles at least, because it has, funnily enough, existed as a piece in the very obviously sort of communist magazine Salvage, and then it was an anarchist zine made by a collective, and then it was also an academic paper that looks like an academic paper with as a PDF. So it's the same text in three very different packages, which I think is kind of wonderful. It definitely gets brought up all the time because, and I think that's got something to do with the fact that it was one of those pieces that just fall out of you already formed without you really knowing what you're about to write. And it's got, a stuffed toy lobster in it, and it's got an old German poem and a very creepy song by Taylor Swift that accompanied my mother's death, and it's got a lot of engagement with a North American Black lesbian tradition of theorizing and practicing polymaternalism in the wake of being ungendered and divested of motherhood status on the colonial plantation, but without hopefully at the same time, without romanticizing Black mothering or making it bear the burden of, saving our world, right? And this chewy thing is that some mothers' refusals to mother has been historically about survival and even comradeship with children, whereas other mothers' refusals are simply, as with my mother's case, dare I say, just sort of understandable maybe, but uncomradely and deeply damaging and traumatizing. So a big question for me has been, when is mothering reproducing the world? And by that way, but and by that I don't mean a compliment, because I'm always clarifying this. The world is in large part a hell world. So this kind of it's this valorization in the Marxist sense of reproductive labor, quote unquote. It's not moral praise to say that mothering makes the world. Have you seen the world? But by the way, it can also transform it, not just reproduce it. That's the point of curiosity. I think one of the earliest, why did I say spiritual and political? When I was very little, I mean, I think the first fight I ever had might have been a sort of feminist fight. And I think, I could even just anecdotalize way more, but you should, I want this to be more, but yeah, there was a story that my brother and I kept watching. We got parked in front of the TV a lot, and there was this there was this Queen of the Night figure in a, it sounds like we're so pretentious. It was just a video cassette that happened. Yeah, well, I'm not going to deny it was a middle class scenario, but we were parked in front of the Magic Flute, which has this Queen of the Night figure in it, who is, we think you're supposed to think she's she's initially good, and then you realize she's bad and evil. And literally I had an argument when I was so little about her being banished. I didn't realize mothers could be banished. And I looked at my mother, who was not a single mother, like well, you described this wonderful queer. Well, it's not wonderful, is it? That's the thing. We're
No.
Yeah. It's not. I just did it. This kind of romanticizing gesture that we do as queer people, trying to legitimate, our kinship forms. And Kathy Cohen, the
Mhm.
you know, in her Punks, Bull Daggers, and Welfare Queens essay, is sort of insisting that it's not just self-identified, you know, queer households that are materially queer. It's
Mhm.
also, you know, households like, you know, the Black welfare queens in the US she was proposing, right?
Yeah.
And this is a definition of queerness that has receded, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think in this short statement that I read out, it's, I mean, the spiritual and political is one part of it, but then it's that abolitionism for you has been tied also to queer liberation struggles.
Mm.
And feminist politics. And I was wondering about the queer liberation part, I guess also because we're here within a queer arts festival,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
thinking queerly, locally also. And I was just wondering like about if there's something you can speak to in terms of that particular part,
Mm.
and how that was important for you maybe, and also how it's important in terms of abolition politics
Mm.
more
Yeah,
generally. Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, there was something about the particular violence of my private nuclear household growing up that I'm somehow not surprised created two queer children, me and my brother, in a that my, you know, not least because I mean my mother sort of preferred annihilation of herself to
Mhm.
motherhood on these terms. Um, and I think that's a pretty, it's not, she's not the only one to have made that assessment, right? I I think this kind of auto theory piece is it's recognizing something that could be understood as queerness in my mother's refusal, despite like an element of admiration that I have in me about it, even recognizing that I'm the cost of it, like
Mhm.
me. Like I think I say somewhere it's hard not to admire a woman on strike even when her product is
Mhm.
you, right? And it's trying this piece to yeah, completely reject some sort of opposition between queerness and um, care or mothering or child oriented politics. And I mean, there's nothing queerer than children, first of all. I mean, not for good and bad. I mean, you know, they're not nicer than anyone else, but there's this kind of brutal dialectic internal to the maternal, where the maternal is an identity and an institution, and at the same time, it's a potentially anti-identitarian collective labor without any fixed or unmovable gender, or even
Mhm.
perhaps generational home, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and so I'm okay. I mean, concretely, because people might not know, it's about this piece that you raised, this moment where my mother, who didn't like being a mother, was dying of cancer and alcoholism and all kinds of related things in 2019. Actually, the fifth anniversary is coming up next week, and the same. It was the same year that my book about the work of pregnancy and what I call amniotechnics, or the possibilities of mothering against motherhood, full surrogacy now, was coming out. And there was something very undignified for this willful, impossible person who was so very alone, um, about desperately requiring and having to accept care from the the few specific individuals, for instance, me, who were biologically, legally, or socially sort of obliged to provide some care, especially since she had no one else. And I was thinking about how the xeno feminist Helen Hester had said that xenofam, i.e. kinship with the unknown, is equal to, she uses the mathematical symbol, equal to or potentially greater than biofam, i.e. kinship that derives from an ideological interpretation of genetics or ideology about blood. But what I kept thinking about when I was thinking about this biofam, xenofam thing she has was that I'd never heard anyone talk about how bio can be xeno for queer people, for so many queer people, even when you grow up in the intimacy of the private nuclear household, right? This form that family abolition doesn't so much want to destroy as kind of render less necessary. Then even then, your kin might be sometimes intractably alien to you. And you know, my mother and I were sort of strangers to one another. We were trying to sometimes over, you know, honor that lovingly. And you know, I'm the kind of weird, perverse sort of contrarian who, you know, when I hear directives under COVID lockdown, like, you know, we've got to treat one another like family, I'm always like, what are you talking about? like you know, that's a terrible idea. Like, haven't you seen where all the violence in the world happens? I think what if we said we've got to treat one another like strangers, right? That kind of xeno-hospitality, like the care and curiosity and dignity that we owe the stranger. But you know, that's and so I'm thinking about, you know, what in this essay, what about her unmotheredness, which was probably one of the first things I noticed in my life, right? Oh my God, this division of labor is really bad for everyone, even though we love each other, we want, you know, in fact, because we love each other, we want surely, you know, the best for one. And I mean, that's an easy thing to say. I want the best for you, but you know, if you want the best for someone, you want them not to be blackmailed into non-consensual hyperdependence on you, right? So I tried to some extent, and I'm not sure I can say I tried my best to be a death doula and a momrad to my extremely uncare-oriented, non-momradly mother. And the whole thing made me understand at an even more visceral level than before how yeah, this private nuclear household, this family is an absurdly dysfunctional way of organizing care in the world, and it's a sort of deeply naturalized web of organized scarcity, and the prime victims in a sense include queer people, right? That in Philadelphia, and I think everywhere, the populations of, you know, refugees from the family are disproportionately queer, right? 80% in this city, you know, it's queer kids who are not being served, who are the kind of cost of this way of doing life that we're somehow consented to, sort of expending, rendering disposable. Right.
Yeah, I think for a lot of queer kids, the dynamic of the mother just doesn't make sense very early on. I mean, a lot of people I would talk to would have this question of what is this? You know, what's going on here? And also in terms of then, I mean, you say, you know, maybe there can, you know, be an easy leaning towards romanticizing somebody else's story. Like I'm queering a little bit in this alien story about my mum bringing me down to see Ripley fighting with this alien. Like it's a queer kind of slight, could be origin story. But of course, in the Irish working class family household, whether it's like a nuclear family or a more chaotic construction, which this situation was, the reproduction of feminized labor is very active. Yeah. So you know, the expectation on, I've known so many dykes who are eldest daughters.
Mm.
It's like I could have done a whole project about this. And like just even the conversations then, you know, about that, and always very contentious, very difficult, very troubled relationship with the mother. Um, but it's, I think this, I'm gonna quote something else back to you. So this, I'm not sure if this is, I think this is also from this essay, actually. Or could be abolish the family. Families are work relations. They trap feminized people in isolated, unwaged workplaces, and moreover, function predominantly to generate present and future workers for capital to wring value from. Because of this, and because children, moreover, possess very few rights and freedoms within the home, an all important question for those of us opposed to the tyranny of work is how to abolish the family for kids. It's a really radical question. The horizon of children's liberation was once a serious concern for the left. And I've kind of left it there because I was wondering if you could fill that in a little bit, actually. I was really curious about that. Yeah.
Yeah. 50 years ago, it was not uncommon to hear progressives advocate for children as the poorest and sometimes the most oppressed population on earth, right? A group that was in need of suffrage, maybe. I mean, it's of guaranteed basic income, maybe, of maybe physical, even erotic autonomy, right? And in the 70s, a number of youth liberation groups sprang up across the world, supported by adult allies, especially in the gay power and gay liberation and women's liberation movements. And so these activists often consciously understood themselves in a history. That part is definitely even more forgotten. So sometimes there was a harkening back to the baby strikes, so-called, of prepubescent Pennsylvania mill workers in 1903, 1933, and school strikes that raged in the UK between 1911 and 1939. And this was a strike wave where thousands of children demanded shorter hours, wages for schoolwork, and an end to corporeal punishment. In Michigan, in Ann Arbor, which actually happens to be the same place that Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, the big sort of new left organization, started as well. There was this organization called Youth Liberation, that developed a platform for and it was exclusively children, right? They developed a platform of juvenile economic independence, anti-sexism, anti-racism, internationalism, and an end to adult chauvinism. And they had one of their spokespersons was a 15-year-old at the time called Sonia Yako, who ran for the Board of Education in 1972. And she was demanding, age unrestricted political participation rights, psychiatric deinstitutionalization, sexuality related freedoms, orientation, sort of queer freedoms, and the abolition of parental tyranny.
Wow.
And I mean, these are just stories that I think the left has forgotten, maybe even more than the phrase abolish the family. Maybe people know a bit about unschooling and free schooling, child autonomy in the context of communes. But I think the pointed sort of theoretical initiatives of children have been erased quite dramatically. And I mean, that's, we can talk for hours about why that is, and talk about the victory of the neoliberal counter-revolution and the success of the new right in the 80s in sort of suturing the whole question of children's, actually, you know what, I'm going to say the whole question of children to, you know, the concept of innocence and the necessity for safety, and opposing all of that to the specter of gender and sexuality related liberation horizons. So there was this, you know, cunning and extremely well-funded and basically still successful, we're still living in its shadow, sort of intervention that pitted children against all of the sorts of body autonomy politics that adults might be invested in. And the left has actually, I think, never come up with an answer. It has basically allowed children to be the thing of the right, I'm going to say, on some profound, like on a profound level, you know. So yeah, I do want people to be sort of to join me in feeling a kind of outrage at being stripped of a certain kind of history. Like our ancestors are not just adults; they're also children in the red decade, especially right now, because where I am, and you know, parents' rights are really in the ascendant. And I would say this proprietary parents' rights edifice is, you know, is a really scary central part of the fascism that's clearly around the corner. But I also want to affirm, obviously, in case that I might be misheard or misunderstood, that parents are, you know, central to any sort of care, abolitionist, communizing politics. Many parents already cherish children's freedom and genuinely sort of strive to abet children's autonomy, right? I know many such parents, and I try to be an intergenerational friend to the children that they have made, and the children in my life, whom I try to enact a sort of responsibility for and consider friends. But I've learned through the experience of, you know, children and their liberatory care, of company with children, that when, you know, for example, when children transition, they do not owe us an explanation, to quote Andrea Longchu, right? She says they are taking charge of their own creation. And what this kind of often does in the public conversation is become a very narrow type of culture war framing. Such thing, it's always a class war. Sorry, like I think sometimes you've got to be a vulgar Marxist about it. This is not about trans minorities. This is about all children, and in fact, it's about bodily autonomy on a much more universal scale than that, because this entire agenda is about reinforcing, pushing people back into the private nuclear household. You know, there's a whole agenda around sex segregation and the reimposition of a gender division of labor, of cisness, really. The whole thing is a cisness counter-revolution that we're seeing. But
I mean,
what I think, yeah, go on.
Like throughout your work, you also meet a lot of backlash. Like a lot of people don't like what you're proposing. I guess I was wondering, say with the family abolition, like intensive research that you do, and also how you write about it and how you write it as a manifesto, and then now doing this like extended research about trans exclusionary radical feminism. And you know, I was wondering, have you found connections in terms of the reactiveness to the politics from within trans exclusionary radical feminism and people who don't like the idea of family abolition? Is there any connection between those things?
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a pretty you know, there's actually a whole historiography, a whole ontology that goes along with a particular kind of enemy feminist, I guess the one you're naming, that is, I mean, it's complicated because there are different trans exclusionary feminisms, but I would say that, you know, this we're really, it's like a, yeah, it's a radical fight about the definition of feminism. I don't deny that they are feminists, actually. I just propose that there's a fascist feminism that is possible. And the object, I mean, you quoted earlier, I contend, I guess, that the proper object of gay liberationist and women's liberationist and children's liberationist struggle is this form, the private nuclear household or the family. And they are just trying to create a more solid rather than sort of vague straw person. Let's say Kathleen Stock or Julie Bindel or somebody. They really disagree. They really don't think that the problem is that deep, actually. And they say that explicitly sometimes, you know. That's the fundamental disagreement. They think that we can have sex and gender equality and whatever, I don't know what I think equality would be the word that they use, without changing the patriarchal institution of motherhood, what I would call the you know, a form that is profoundly shaped by property law. And I you know, I just don't think that's true. I think we're not gonna get out of this with a sort of mere like valorization of mothers, right? I mean, many times when TERFs in Britain have negatively reviewed my work, they have said the title has been something like "Trust Mothers" or "Listen to Mothers" or "Just Let Mothers Be in Charge." And yeah, that's actually not a bad. It's a fairly honest. So I mean, there are also dishonest things about their approach. Like, for instance, they think I don't have a sense of humor, which is outrageous. But, like, sorry, that's like the worst thing they've ever said. Like, call me a pedophile, whatever. Say I'm not funny, and now but like, you know, for instance, I've actually even written about getting married, right? I have a green card. I am an immigrant. Yes, I did that, and I think it's very funny, as well, that a family abolitionist is married. But there's this really, and that's 6 years ago. You know, but Kathleen Stock and Julie Bindel are still bringing it up, like,
Wow.
like it's a huge invalidation of everything. But I said it's funny. Yeah,
but I guess polarizing things, you kind of lose the humor, you know.
yeah, totally.
You know, there's no nuance allowed. We're flying through time. Are you okay for a little bit more and then a few questions?
Yes, please.
Amazing. Do you have any questions for me?
Well, yeah, I've been loving reading your writing, and the question you pose about who's the alien and who's Ridley, or you know, who's who in that story of in that shuttle that you describe in that short piece of writing you read out to us. That's really been sitting with me. It's profound to me. My own biography has these sorts of elements of like running, you know, people are sort of trying to escape from it. People are in an exploding shuttle trying to get out of the situation as well. And I've just reread Octavia Butler's story Blood Child, which this kind of you know, I don't think people quite talk about the fact that title, it's the grubs, right? It's the worms inside the male body, or the male surrogate pregnancy. That's what the child is. It's this blood-covered, blood-filled blood-eating worm that is very beloved, that it's the click mother-father, sort of mother inseminator's baby. That's what the blood child is. Humans are bringing it forth in this planet, in this famous story. And I think it's one of the most challenging sorts of texts about concepts that can be made quite cuddly and fuzzy in queer multi-species environmental humanities sometimes, like symbiosis and entanglement and co-production, and and I really, these things aren't symmetrical or pretty or nice, right? I just wondered whether you sometimes feel that there's sort of parasitism or alienness in that Alien the movie kind of sense in the sort of the kind of familial setting out of which you've also erupted yourself.
Yeah, I think with this moment, I come back to it because it's hugely memorable. And I've talked with other queer people also, about the first time they witnessed Ripley in the first Alien movie. And it's such a queer representation. It's so, in so many ways, it's a very particular representation of gender as well. So I think that's one part. But then another part is, I think my first thought was that my mother was showing me this so that I would feel empowered. But then I started to think, what for and who for? So I kind of started to loop and think, is it to do with me becoming the person who fights for my single mother, like the kind of protector? Or is it to do with her protecting me? Or is it this, what kind of loop is this, and it's difficult to talk about. And I think there's a lot that I can't say in telling these bits of stories. So I'm kind of also using the alien and horror and body horror as ways of thinking and talking about things that I can't speak to directly at the moment. But I think this parasitical thing of being an only child, single mother, working class, it was a bit the circular and confused, and never ending story to kind of tease apart. And yeah, I think when I was a kid, these stories of being strong and fighting, being able to fight, were so important. And this one with Ripley, because Ripley is in this film is a dyke. It's like a butch dyke, there's no other examples. There was nothing else. Wonder Woman? Wonder Woman was like a runway model or something, So it was really, I don't know. And then I guess I was thinking about the people who were in that room, and the kind of, literally, who gets out? Who gets out alive, in a way. It sounds a bit blunt, but in a way, who gets out alive? And Ripley also is totally alone in that, except for a cat. Everyone else is dead. Sorry for the spoiler, but if you haven't seen it, I'm sorry about you. Everyone is mutilated, dead, impregnated, and there's something I think about the singular as well, that she survives and she's alone. I don't know. It's something I kind of go into and come out of, and I keep watching the film. I keep watching it over and over and over and over. And that last bit, the last bit of the film, I'm going to do something with it. I haven't figured out exactly what, but I feel like it's going to involve BDSM. because the onboard computer in Alien, the first Alien film, is called Mother.
Mm.
It's like too good to be true. It's and Mother controls everything, like the temperature, the food, life support, work hours, and has an ulterior motive to get everyone pregnant with this alien.
Yeah.
Like it's layered, you know.
Yeah.
And then there's something, of course, that film is famous for, like, you know, being like kind of presenting the horror, psychological and body horror of gestation.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other layer as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah.
that I don't know if that answers your question. I feel like it's a bit like snake eating the tail in terms of if we had more time, I'd be so interested to go back to this idea of annihilation and motherhood and self-annihilation. I think it's so interesting, and there's so many examples in horror, some in sci-fi plus horror, that that represent this in different ways. There's one film, an Irish horror film, I think it's called Mother, and it's about a changeling. Basically, the mother is taken over by a changeling. And the changeling in Irish mythology, and I'm not an expert, so this is really potted, is like, it's like a fairy. It's a fairy that comes and takes over a person. And it was commonly something that was a reason that was given when somebody was having mental health issues.
Yeah, totally.
Or some kind of collapse. And in this film, it's horror, but it's very, very clear that it's also a working class Dublin family. It's very clear that it's speaking to addiction and mental health. But it's, you know, it's really intensely horrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe to finish, what do you think about horror as a technology for thinking about these things, like thinking about family abolition and
I think horror is quite often reactionary, and I don't quite understand why that is, but at the same time, it has I think some of the most radical and queer and feminist potential, sort of both.
Yeah.
And it's one of those body genres, right? It kind of gets us like in the yeah, in the body.
And psychological, like and the psychological part of it as well.
And I mean, it's always, I mean, I wrote about this. That's another essay that people like. It's always the ones I don't really work on very hard that become like cult essays or whatever. Like, it's called The Satanic Death Cult is Real, and it's about Ari Aster's Hereditary and Midsommar, and which I think I think it's, he said is part of sort of one thought. Although I don't think he really knew what he was making, if you ask me. I think Beau is Afraid, or whatever that one was called, told me maybe or suggested to me that he didn't know what he made when he made Midsommar and Hereditary. I think there's that, which is fine. So I'd say
I haven't seen it actually. What's the name of the film?
Oh, Hereditary. Oh, so the first film this guy made was called, well, on the big he might have made shorts before. It's called Hereditary. And then there was one called Midsommar that followed it up, and he's become quite a famous, successful filmmaker because of these films. And it hit me like the first one hit me like a ton of bricks, and it made me write about horror. Sorry for assuming things, but I wrote an essay for a magazine called Commune that sort of talked about how and I don't want to claim that any of this is really original, you know, stuff from me, but the horror genre often has this kind of invitation to think that the family form is the last bastion protecting you against the worst possible things. And at the same time, it's often really showing you things that, you know, psychoanalytically speaking, you know, you'd want to say suggest a desire to destroy the family, right? This is where the house is the kitchen is the most dangerous place ever. The
Mhm.
houses burn alive. You know, the family burns alive in horror. There's this reactionary tendency to say, no, like the horror is coming from outside the house, but
Mhm.
at the same time, you keep seeing that it's coming from inside, isn't it? And we see all these kind of crazed demonic children and mothers, and
Mhm.
endlessly in this genre. I think I I enjoy horror. I just uh I'm trying to push myself personally to sort of take the step more into speculative fabulation and
Mhm.
critical utopias, and
Mhm.
everything for everyone is it by M.E. O'Brien and Eman Abdel Hadi is a recent kind of family abolitionist worlding in a series of sort of interviews with people from the future. Um, and they're going to continue that and bring more people into that
Mhm.
metaverse or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think maybe it is, at least where I'm at, I think uh, horror isn't yeah, it's not where I feel it's important for me to sort of
Mhm.
orient. But like you asked me when we were chatting before about this really strange book that I got sent, and then I had quite a few conversations with the author. It's called
Mhm.
Never Had a Dad. It's
Yeah.
by Georgie Codd. And it's so weird. It's one of these, she, in the best possible way. The weirdness of it is that it's completely poker faced. There is no I don't mean to
Should
be
I should I give some context for this?
yes,
So it's
yes,
I mean, I heard you talk about this on a podcast where you were
yeah,
talking about the film Titan. And it's a woman who wanted a dad, either didn't have a good relationship with her dad or didn't know who her dad was, biological dad, and advertised for a dad, not sexually. Like it was like she wanted
yeah.
a dad. And met people and then found somebody, right?
Yeah, she interviewed several. She sort of started trying with several. She had several dads in auditioning. Um,
Yes.
and this is real, by the way. It's not. It
Yeah.
really, it's real. It really happened. And there's something so I'm sort of going there after talking about critical utopias because this is, in a sense, an
Mhm.
experiment in testing the limits of um, this form. Uh,
Mhm.
you know, I guess to really clarify, if you put a gun to my head, you'd probably I'd probably say I don't really think dad as a form, like as a technology, really has a place in um in a you know in a gender liberated society.
Yeah.
Um, I think dads when they are yeah, I mean and maybe I need to sort of wrestle more with this and have my mind changed or it would change historically. But I've basically been saying, dad is an authorship fantasy. Maybe maybe it's fine, benign sometimes, but that when you are doing the labor of care, you're doing mothering, right? Motherers could be the alternative,
Mhm.
and that's the only way I can see so far. I've not been able to see another way through. Like everybody has to become mother. Maybe that's the ultimate horror movie. Everybody is mother. Everybody has to be. Um, and I don't see how there is a specificity about dad that we have a place for outside of property logic, outside of a
Mhm.
fantasy of authorship. Which is not to say I don't love the great dads in the world around me that I know, but I just think that they're doing mothering. um, but she really completely disagreed, right? We had this conversation. She was like, "No, I really wanted a dad." I was like, "What? What about that? What did you want? And you can't, it turns, it's really hard to advertise for a dad. It would not be so hard to advertise for a mom. Do you want to be my mom? Literally, someone said that to Kamala Harris. Drew Barrymore said that to Kamala Harris. Won't you be my mom? It's totally normal.
That's so disturbing.
But asking someone to be your dad, what's that? What would that mean?
Yeah, unless it's kink, like
unless it's kink.
It's perplexing, but interesting. Very
really
interesting. Yeah, and strange. Okay, I'm keeping an eye on time, Sophie. And if we have a couple of questions, are you good?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So is there anyone who would like to ask anything or Lyman?
Yeah. Thank you for this very enriching and engaging conversation. I've learned a lot, and I really admire this sharp logic of both of you, how you formulate and how you see things. It's an inspiration. And now I would like to go to the beginning of the talk. You mentioned about those everyone for everyone, and then there's like a relationship of mothers and like families and war. And it's just like today, it's like the 1,000th day of the war in Ukraine, and this is like really this tragic situation where like this Putin's Russia, they sort of represent family values. Family values. They are against queer people, against gay, lesbians, and against everything, and they constantly bomb. Children playground, hospitals, every day they bomb residential areas, just like constant genocide. So do you see some kind of crazy correlation of this war and fight for family values?
Did you get that? Yeah?
Yeah, no, I heard.
Thanks, Lyman.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there is certainly so much to say about a contradiction at the heart of the ideology of family, which holds, which is about the sort of promise of safety that has always historically coexisted with a deeply violent nationalistic logic, as in literally, the man is supposed to go to war, and the equivalent in ancient Greece or something was that the woman would die in the battlefield of childbirth, of gestating. This was the way it was sort of formulated, like there has to be a battlefield to die on for the family to, in a symmetrical way, for the family to cohere. And it's, as you have been saying, whoever you are, hello, just, on its face, just, unfathomable how you can talk about the sanctity of, family and children, all, as your main credo, and at the same time, bomb children's wards, bomb grandmothers, grandchildren, hospitals, playgrounds, schools, kindergartens, and yet it's kind of actually totally functioning as it's supposed to. There's no error here, and it's that's because of the direct relation of the family to the nation state. It's not a contradiction in that sense when the United States has a whole bunch of sort of constitutional verbiage about the sanctity of family, and then the tearing apart of families at the border occurs in a systematic, targeted, policy explicit way, right? Like children in cages separated from their their parents, their kin, their caregivers. That's actually part of it, right? It's not abolishing anything. Some people would be like, oh, don't you sort of hate the family? So wouldn't you be happy if there were children in cage? You know, let's just kind of go over this again. Abolition is, I mean, actually, we didn't spell this out, right? Abolition, as you did sort of briefly indicate, Lyónn, is not just negation, right? Far from it. What the border guards are doing is actually very sort of pro-family, paradoxically, right? It is in the service of the logic whereby this kind of sort of ideological sort of hope of safety and the matrix of sort of organized scarcity where we consent because of that image and the absence of alternatives to turn only to family for our needs to be met. And this kind of generates this sort of I've called it scarcity, right? This competitiveness that then sort of coalesces and congeals onto the geopolitical plane. You know, it's the sort of you know, the family of race, of racial biologized interest that goes against you know, the interest of the other, them for them and us for us. And abolition is historically a movement that takes a sort of kernel of you know, need, I would say, of truth, perhaps, if you want to be more metaphysical about it, in a thing, and attempts to take it seriously. So in, you know, when slaves are freeing themselves, they're looking at the way that the society is talking about itself and what is worth actually taking seriously about it. So this is a moment where there's this efflorescence, this efflorescence of rights language and brotherhood language and humanism, right? And so what abolition means, much more than it's usually talked about as just, I don't know, Abraham Lincoln signing a piece of paper and freeing the slaves. That's not actually, you know, that's not really abolition. It shouldn't be talked about that way. Abolition is the process whereby, by freeing themselves, enslaved people are saying, you know, nice humanism you got there, you know, be a shame if someone were to take it seriously by, you know, by ceasing to be a commodity as a human being, you know, and that's it's turning inside out what the thing that you're talking about is saying. So when it comes to prisons, you're talking about the promise of safety, right? You don't want to be, you know, harmed and unsafe. And so prisons and the criminal justice complex says, you know, here's the solution to that need. And abolitionists in you know, are saying that does not do what it says it does, right? That there is no safety being generated in the world. So we have to figure out what would generate real safety in the world. And building that is what abolishing prisons means. It's not setting fire to the prisons, unfortunately, although I'm sure that's part of it at some point, probably in the midst, but it's kind of good news and bad news, because it's much harder than that. You will only have abolished prisons when you've come up with the infrastructures that keep people safe in the way that prisons pretend to do. And so when it comes to family, you're also saying, you know, the family has a hugely important set of needs and promises wrapped up in it. It's supposed to be what makes us known, what gives us belonging, what feeds and shelters us and gives us a purpose for being alive. And you know, the family abolitionist hypothesis is, well, that's not actually happening. That's not really working. We have the evidence, and the bodies are sort of piling up actually at the feet of this family system. And family abolition is almost like a way of abolishing, you could say almost care abolition, like capitalist care, colonial capitalist care has to be sort of turned inside out so that it actually nourishes all of the children of the earth. So it's not just about destroying stuff, although, yeah, aspects of existing care infrastructure actually have to be destroyed.
Mhm.
But the emphasis is on a sort of a world building, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's really good to clarify that, and that's all, and it's almost a good way to bring it to an end, unless there's a burning question from somebody, something that somebody wants to point to or query. Good. I'm going to hang around after if people want to have a chat informally and a drink. I'm really sorry you're not here to do that as well, Sophie.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. I would love to go for a drink with all of you. It sounds like it's a really friendly room. And Lyónn, I just wish all the best for your writings that you've been so good as to send me. And I look forward to the next time we commune in a public or not so public way.
Yeah, no, it's been really, really, really wonderful. I'm so happy for it. I'm going to finish with a tiny list I made earlier, just thinking about what are technologies that nurture family abolition for me. One was our imaginations, crip time, polyamory. That's a bit explosive, but I'm going to put it in there anyway. Transition, BDSM, grief circles, rituals, and doula work, queer club culture, the gay bar, mutual aid and care webs, and psychedelics. And Sophie Lewis is writing. Sophie, thank you so much for being here. It's been really, really wonderful. And yeah, I'm really happy to be continuing to be in exchange with you.
Honor and privilege. Bye. Take care. Bye. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Just gonna come out of the screen.